Hi, I'm Seamless, and today I want to address a question that I am often given, either on a video, in a forum, on Reddit, on Facebook, or in a lesson, how to choose which plugins to use for certain things. I'm often given the questions about being like, what plugin is the best at whatever? What plugin is the best for what some genres? Who uses what plugins to make what sound? How do I make a sound? What plugins do I need to use? Which plugins are just, the better and that kind of thing? And like, I'm not going to say those questions are wrong, but they are particularly limited methods, like limited measurements of sort of a plugin's value. For me personally, there are two primary ways to look at which plugins I'm going to choose to do anything. I only really use one way, but the second way is the way that I used when I didn't really know much about what I was doing in terms of like sound design or producing in general. Um, that way, that sort of noob way, which I'm not saying is bad, but it's sort of it's what you do when you don't really know what you're doing. That way is to sort of look at, if you can, what your idols are using. Figure out, like, for example, Noisia. Noisia is big on FM8. They use Synth One. They like Superior Drummer. They're just various interviews and podcasts and discussions where they talk about these things, and you can kind of infer from there, a reasonable repertoire of plugins to use. Um, Skrillex famously uses FM8. Kill the Noise uses Massive. To do particular sounds, people use particular things, and find out what those things are, and then get them, and then you have them. And you at least know that even if you don't know how to make those sounds, you have no idea how to make the sounds that made you want to get these plugins. You at least know that you have the tools, and that if you can figure out how to use the tools, then you can figure out how to make those sounds. That is a pretty reasonable approach to doing things. Um, I That's not what I would consider to be the best approach, but that's a reasonable approach. What I consider to be the best approach is to look at sort of what the plugins do and what you need to have done, that kind of thing. There's a whole wide range of things that plugins do and that kind of thing. For synths, it's pretty easy to break down. Synths are, like, in the core aspects of like what synthesis is. There's only so many kinds of synthesis: subtractive, FM, additive, wavetable. Um, I'm sure there's probably some more people can come up with, but those are the basic types. And for me personally, what I've always done is I've looked around for plugins that are these particular types of plugins and figure out which ones do that the best. Um, I have Harmer for additive synthesis. I have Citrus for FM synthesis. I have Serum for wavetable synthesis, and they all do subtractive synth. There's not really a lot of things that are just subtractive synths these days. And so, like, they are, and given any other plugin, I can compare those plugins with the other plugin and determine that generally these things have features and can do more than the plugins that they compete with. And that's how I sort of make my decisions. This is also true for sort of like what I use for compressor plugins, what I use for EQs, what I use for like any other sort of effects processing and that kind of thing. Although, like, the differences between certain kinds of EQs, for example, like between FL's just basic parametric EQ2 versus FabFilter's Pro Q2. I mean, technically, in a very, very definitive ways, the Pro Q2 is better, but I don't really care because I don't need it to be that kind of better for me to use to do what I want. That's really all there is to that. Um, and like, I've never really found it to be necessary to upgrade to that kind of thing, that sort of deal. I mean, if I had all the money in the universe, I would just get all of like the newest, best, greatest things and whatever, and just use them, and it's great. The problem with that, though, the newest, best, and most expensive kind of thing, like, a lot of people throw around the terms like audio quality. Things have like people talking about how like one synth has less audio quality than another synth, and there are measurable ways that you may determine what quote unquote audio quality is, but for the most part, nobody will ever know, that you use a synth that had less audio quality involved in it. And if you really want to think about it, Citrus is old, right? It's 2004. That's when it came out. Massive, I believe, came out in 2003. And yet, everyone's using it all the time. And it's not as if it was some kind of paragon of cleanness with its particular sound. Like, the measurement that I'm referring to is, if you remember when Serum came out, Steve Duda actually made a whole bunch of comparisons about how clean the saw waves were and like aliasing and that kind of thing. And Serum is like arguably the best now. It's just that's not really it's not really a metric I ever really cared about. Yeah. And I'm sure like those same measurements can be applied between, you know, the parametric EQ2 versus the Pro Q2 for things like phase distortion and that kind of thing. And like that's totally fine. It's just that that's not really a thing that matters to me. And you have to sort of want to know what things that matter to you. And I also know that it's hard to figure out what matters to you if you don't know what those things are. If you don't know what phase distortion is, if you don't know what aliasing means in terms of audio quality, if you don't know, you know, what bit depth actually means and what sample rates actually mean and that kind of thing, and how it impacts your audio sort of at the end of the day. If you don't know all this stuff, then it's sort of hard to make that kind of decision based on, you know, which plugin is like technically better. But then, you know, if you're at that level when you don't know that kind of stuff, that's when you can reasonably have the first option, which is just find the plugins that the people that you like use, and sort of you're essentially sort of trusting their intuition on that kind of thing. But here's something about that: you need to be really careful when it comes to adopting plugins like that and then running around saying that because of that they're the best. Like, I know that it's kind of in our nature to buy something and be like, this is the greatest thing ever, I put money on it, it can't not be good, because then that would mean that I made a bad decision and I lost money and I'd be sad. Like, that's a thing that we do as humans. But like, it's become abundantly clear that not everybody needs to have all the technical knowledge in the world to actually produce music at a reasonable level. In fact, most people at the highest of the highs producing level don't really know as much about producing as even some people that I've had lessons with, that I've taught. Not because that they got knowledge from me, because they already had the knowledge. They already know more things than like certain producers I'm not going to name. Like, and that to that end, like, you can't really trust that the decision that they made for whatever plugin they want to use was based on anything other than the fact that they just like that plugin more. Like, and which you might be thinking, well, okay, what else is there? I mean, there's the technical reasons I was talking about before. I'm just saying that, like, while they did make the sound with that plugin, don't you know, fall into the trap of thinking that like it's not possible to make that sound better with something else. I mean, I can make a pretty provable case for a lot of things about like Harmor, that if I make a particular kind of sound with Harmor, that you really can't make that with anything else. But one day I might be disproven about that, you know. I might. I like to focus on the technical abilities of certain things, but then you also sort of, even in the in-between of not knowing anything and then knowing a bunch of stuff, there's also the value of workflow. There's the value of the fact that even if FM8 is like definitively inferior to Citrus, that you might just be used to FM8. You might like it better. You might be able to do the stuff that you want to do with it faster and better, more reliably than you could do with Citrus, even though Citrus can totally do everything that FM8 can do, with the exception of FMing incoming audio. But even that's a bit of a hack. And there's value to that fact that like you might be able to say something is technically superior, but a user might find that to be not enough. Like, for example, you know, I get what I want. I get what I can get out of using the parametric EQ2, even though like I could go get a FabFilter Pro Q2 and use that, even because it is like, you know, better for a lot of reasons. But it doesn't matter because I can do what I want to do with parametric EQ2. I'm used to it. I'm used to how it looks. I'm used to its particular brand of analysis. I'm used to all that kind of stuff. And people like are used to Massive. They're used to FM8. They're used to these things that like there are better versions of their kind of synthesis available that could do more incredible things and different stuff, even the same stuff. But it's like if I tried to use Ableton. Like Ableton and FL are very different things. They do more or less the same stuff. They're very comparable as far as like software goes, but they are presented to you in a vastly different way. And even if they're the same, or even if one was proven to be better than the other, I would always use FL because I'm just used to FL's workflow. On the other hand, if I were to use Ableton, even because I'm not used to the workflow, chances are I would actually do stuff that it would never have occurred to me to do in FL because I'm presented with different paths, different things in front of me that are like I wouldn't have thought to use ever because I'm not used to it and because it's different. So there is some value to finding a plugin or an interface or anything that is essentially the same as what you're doing, but just a little bit different, because then you'd be presented with options that you wouldn't have thought of because you're super duper used to the workflow of whatever tools that you have. You know, like I constantly talk about Harmor versus Razor, where they're both additive synths, but Harmor can do everything Razor can do, and Razor can't do even half what Harmor can do. However, Razor just by default has a lot of very interesting sounds that it would not have occurred to a person to do in Harmor, just because of the way Harmor presents its parameters and the way that Razor presents its parameters. And that has value. That there is a value to that. I mean, I went to Razor and I kind of went and looked at it, and then I took everything I knew about it, and I figured out how to do it in Harmor, so now I don't really need to care about it. But if I never had Razor, I wouldn't have ever had that thought. That would have never entered my mind. It's related to the concept where, you know, you get really used to your own music, and so you think it's good, and you're no longer objectively able to determine whether or not certain things are good, even by your own standards. So you have someone else listen to it, give you critique, or you have someone else master it to prevent these issues. It's the same kind of deal. If you get super duper used to sort of things like this, and a lot of people mistake this for the plugins limitations. I guarantee you, a lot of people, when they're talking about like, oh, the plugin can't do this, the plugin can't do that, they do not really understand the true limitations of the software they're using, because most of the time I can debunk whatever they're saying pretty much immediately. And even if it's not just about stuff that I use, even if it's about like FM8 or Massive or something like that, there's always something in there that they're missing. And I guarantee you there's probably stuff in like Citrus and Massive or Harmor that I'm still missing because of just how ridiculously deep those particular pieces of softwares are. So like you have to be careful when thinking hard and fast things about anything, really, you know. And this is a larger philosophy about, you know, not being sure about anything and just being like, yes, I am 100% sure about what's happening here, about that thing, whatever. And someone's like, yeah, but the difference in the stuff that you were thinking about, you're like, oh, shit. Yeah. So the lesson there is don't ever be sure about anything. Yeah. I pretty much already covered my advice about plugin choice in the beginning of this video. The idea that you could either find the plugins that people you like use because they do stuff that you like with them, or you can make real like technical decisions about, you know, what does what for what purpose and that kind of thing. I obviously prefer the latter, but the former is fine. It's obviously very successful. People have done that for years, for everything. Like, I mean, this is why sponsorships exist. This is why companies go to artists and sponsor them with their gear. So that when somebody is inspired by that artist, like a drummer, and they're like, you know, oh man, I wanna sound just like, I don't know, Travis Orban or something, and they're like, okay, well, what cymbals does he use? He uses Zildjian cymbals. What cymbals? What, like, you know, hardware? What drums? All these. What is it that he is using to do what he's doing? Like, if you're not able to know how to do what he's doing just already, then like you go and get what he's doing. This is a good starting point, and that's a reasonable thing to do. Same thing with like guitars and like keyboards and bass guitars and mics and that kind of thing. Just people being like, what mic do you use all the time? And it's like, this is an SM58 or 57. And like, this doesn't even really matter, because if you knew enough about, you know, recording voice and recording mics, then like you could do what you have. You could probably do what you want with what you got, and it'll be fine. You know, and that's often true with like synthesis. This is why I always break things down to its basic synthesis type of being, whether it's subtractive or FM or additive. If I'm making a sound with Citrus, I'm not making a sound with Citrus, I'm making a sound with FM synthesis. And if I believe a sound was made with FM8, then I'm going to treat it as a sound that was made with FM synthesis. And then I'm going to approach it like that. Like that's the value of sort of knowing how your tools work and knowing how everything in general works, because for the most part, a lot of things are different plugins and different manufacturers just do things that are the same, just in a vaguely different way. Or they're like ImageLine, where they do the things as hard as they possibly can for every parameter and don't worry so much about the user experience. So many knobs. So yeah, like think about that kind of stuff. Just think about things, and like everyone, there are people who are asking me questions like, you know, what's the best synth for EDM, or what's the best compressor for metal, and that kind of thing. And like, people do make very specific plugins for very specific purposes like that, but it is ultimately better for everyone involved if you just figure out the best, like if you could just figure out how to do that with regular stuff. What I mean by regular stuff is just being like, take Maximus, for example, and figure out how to do whatever kind of compression you want to do with Maximus, and you usually are fine. Versus trying to find a particular, like, compressor plugin that somebody made that's like, this is the best, like, bass booster. Bass booster, really? Really? And you end up saving a lot of money and time if you do this, if you learn this kind of stuff as well. Since you're not, like, you find, every once in a while you'll find somebody that's just, pick one or two plugins and learn them inside out, and they're usually pretty okay. And I agree with that, but I would take that a step further, is pick a particular kind of synthesis and learn that inside out. Learn what additive synthesis really is. Learn what subtractive is. Learn what FM is. In that regard, generally speaking, you can do anything with anything, provided the plugins are designed in such a way that they're not very limiting. Yeah. I hope I made a lot of that clear. If you have any questions about this, let me know. And as usual, have a nice day.